Really, when fighting a skeleton like Aints, crushing weapons would deal more damage and give the advantage. But Hecarim was better with cutting weapons, and wasn't he very confident with crushing ones. What he needed to do in this battle was continue dealing damage, even a little bit at a time. He shouldn't use big moves hoping for lots of damage when he wasn't sure if they would land. His twin blades whipped at Aints' head. A normal enemy would get hit. A first-rate enemy would get off with a scratch. But what about a super first-rate enemy? HMPH. Aints interrupted the sword's arcs with his shield. An ordinary person wouldn't have made it in time, but superior physical ability made it possible. Magic arrow, lesser agility. As the hard sounds of Hecarim's two attacks being repelled by the shield rang out, Arch's spell became an arrow and flew at Aints. At the same time, Robodic targeted Hecarim and cast an agility-raising support spell. Child's play. Aints didn't even look at Arch. Just as a shot of light was about to hit him, it disappeared. Arch gaped in shock. Magic immunity? What kind? HMPH. As if in reply, Aints struck at Hecarim's face with his shield. A shield blow. The name of the well-known fundamental move flashed through Hecarim's head. He saw it as an opportunity and readied an attack. He would aim for Aints' torso, which he figured would be a blind spot due to the shield. But Aints easily deflected it with his black blade. He read my move. He just barely evaded the black shield coming at him like a wall by ducking. A kick from a greave-clad foot was approaching. A normal kick wasn't so scary, but it had become apparent through their exchange that the attacks Aints' muscular strength unleashed, despite the fact that he was a skeleton with no muscles, were all deadly blows. If one landed, he had to be prepared for a lethal wound. Hecarim hurried to roll out of the way. Without Robodic's magical assistance, it probably wouldn't have been possible. The kick's wind pressure ripped a few of his hairs out, sending chills up his spine. Over here, Emina shot 2 arrows at once. Since she had shouted, it wasn't a surprise attack. Aints was able to deal with them calmly. The arrows missed their mark and flew behind him. Aints was a skeleton, so arrows wouldn't work on him. She had hoped he would just take them without even bothering to evade, but it seemed like things wouldn't work out that conveniently. The heads of the fallen projectiles were smashed. They were specially made magic arrows that dealt crushing damage. Skeletons were weak against crushing damage. If he hadn't dodged, they would have been very effective. Still, there was nothing to be upset about. Hecarim had been able to use the opening to get back on his feet and take some distance. The whole reason Emina had shouted was to create that opening. Hecarim charged to counter. Twin swords slash. Ha. Aints had no trouble blocking the dual slash attack with his single sword. The impact made Hecarim's hands go numb. This guy is tough. So this is what it's like when a monster with physical ability far surpassing that of a human trains to be a warrior. I guess the reigning champion would be strong. Fighting in range of a sword that dealt one-hit death consumed an extraordinary amount of mental energy. His brain was screaming with exhaustion, and he attempted to retreat to a more comfortable distance. But Aints wasn't about to let him do that. You think you're getting away? Aints rushed him. Obviously, the one moving forward was faster than the one backpedaling. Hecarim was feeling cornered when he heard something whiz past the side of his head from the rear. It was a high-speed arrow loosed from cover. For a normal person, it would be impossible to dodge, but perhaps they should have guessed the arrow never reached Aints with his superhuman reflexes. Flash, lesser strength. A burst of light appeared before Aints' eyes. Flash was a spell that temporarily shrank the target's field of vision a little, regardless of resistance, but it seemed to have been useless against Aints. He merely exhibited his annoyance. Don't get in my way. Aints clicked his tongue as Hecarim, with boosted agility and strength, closed in, reinforcing armor, evil protection. Arch and Robodic fortified Hecarim with support magic. Aints was busy evading, blocking, and countering Hecarim's attacks when another arrow went flying for his face. HMPH. His posture as he moved his head slightly to dodge was appropriate for a master of the tomb and becoming of a monster warrior. Hecarim took advantage of the support to get some distance and wipe away the sweat that had accumulated on his brow during this still short but intense fight. He'd known it already, but Aints' gown was strong. A human could never hope to achieve Aints' physical ability. On top of that, Aints possessed the skills to take advantage of his body. He was insightful enough to see through feints and perceptive enough to grasp the movements of every Foresight member. He had magic resistance and a magic sword and shield. He had everything a warrior could want. There was a reason Hecarim had been able to fight on an equal footing with such a man. Certainly, he was just barely hanging on throughout every exchange. If he tried to parry and mistook the angle of the sword, his weapon would break. He would be critically injured. If he misjudged the range and speed of a swing, even by a tiny bit, he'd be sliced in half. This luck was as if every coin he tossed came up heads, but he was also being protected. There was an even bigger reason he was making it through this fight. That was teamwork. Movement as one was only possible between friends who had survived deadly battlefields together. They could even read one another's thoughts. The compound Foresight and the solo Aints Ulgaun were having a close fight. Hecarim extinguished the smile that had begun to form in his cheeks. Aints was still unharmed. This wall was thick and high, but it wasn't absolute, believing that he swung his twin swords. The fastest attack Hecarim could unleash with his magically strengthened body was repelled ever so easily by the black round shield. The flying arrows were slashed in half by the black sword. All the while, Arch and Robotic's magic continued to boost Hecarim. They heard Aints click his tongue in displeasure. The hostility they sensed from him subsided dramatically. Hecarim had been thinking to do a follow-up attack, but he chose to catch his breath instead and backed up. Aints was undead, so he wouldn't get tired, but Hecarim and his team were gradually exhausting themselves. A lengthy battle of attrition would put them at a disadvantage. It was right to rest when they could. Just as I thought I seemed to lack a finishing move, and I thought I understood the strength of numbers, but now that I am outnumbered, I just feel so irritated. Why can't I take out even just one of these guys? When Aints shrugged, it didn't bother Hecarim. He knew he meant what he said. That was the real power of teamwork. Hecarim smiled as if Aints had complimented them. Then the peerless beauty, who had been watching in silence so far, opened her mouth to speak. Lord Aints, perhaps it is time to end this jest. What? I beg your pardon, but I find it hard to allow these most insolent thieves any more freedom. They attempted to cheat you using the supreme beings. Don't you think the time for mercy is over? Hey Albedo, Lord Aints is no aura. Albedo's right. Aints shook his head. Besides, I think this is plenty. I feel like I gained a fair amount of experience in that fight. Indeed, you have fought admirably. Of course I would expect nothing less from our ruler. Heh. Really, I am glad. Coming from a far greater warrior like you, praise kind of gives me butterflies even when it is flattery. It is most certainly not flattery. I believe it with all my heart. I see. Then thank you. Now all I need is Cocytus's critique and opinion on how I should train from here on out. Nodding a few times in satisfaction, Aints turned back to Foresight. Hecarim had a bad feeling about this shift in atmosphere. The intuition he'd sharpened in many a life and death battle was screaming danger. Okay, that's enough fooling around with swords. Time for a new game. Aints dropped his sword and shield. They disappeared when they hit the ground. Throwing away one's sword meant admitting defeat, but Aints' attitude didn't imply surrender. He shouldn't have been in a situation where he had to acknowledge his loss. This confused Hecarim. He had no idea what Aints was thinking. What are you? Aints smiled faintly. Hecarim felt like he did know. The skeleton slowly spread his arms. It was a loving gesture, like an angel accepting believers or a mother embracing her child. You don't know? Then I'll put it into words for you. Aints sneered. I'll play with you. Come at me, humans. The mood had changed. Normally, abandoning a weapon would make someone weaker, but Hecarim felt like Aints had grown more powerful. He was assailed by an overwhelming sense of authority, as if Aints had gotten physically larger. A being who grows more powerful by casting his sword away. There were only two answers he could think of. One possibility was that Aints was a monk and used his body as a weapon, but the way he fought before didn't seem to indicate he was used to that style of combat. So there was one other possibility. A caster, Arch shouted, having reached the same conclusion as Hecarim. Yes, only now did they realize that the being before them, Aints Ulgaun, might just be a caster. It was only natural that it didn't occur to them sooner. Who could imagine a caster going head-to-head with Hecarim, the strongest member of their team and a seasoned fighter? Casters, especially arcane casters, were more physically vulnerable than warriors. If they had time to train their bodies, it was better spent honing their magic. That was why there were no casters who could brawl on equal terms with a warrior. That was common sense. The one before them was a being who turned common sense on its head, but who could have known that? Hence the pleading tone in Arch's shout, please deny it. Tell me it's not true. If he confirmed that he was a caster, it meant that he had more confidence in himself as a caster than as a warrior. What that meant was obvious. Using a little magic could massively improve one's combat ability. A few fortification spells could make one dramatically stronger, just like Hecarim was right then. In that case, you finally figured it out. What a bunch of fools you are. But you the mice who trampled into my friend's tomb, Nazarick, with your dirty feet. Makes sense that you wouldn't be terribly bright. But as long as Arch was with him, Hecarim had reason enough to deny that claim. Arch, is this guy a caster? No, definitely not, at least not an arcane caster. What is that supposed to mean? I don't sense any magical energy coming from you. Oh, you using detection magic? Do excuse me. Ain't spread his fingers so that Hecarim and the others could see them. They were only bones fitting for an undead. Each one had a ring. If I take this ring off, you'll understand. I lent one to one of my subordinates for a while as he spoke. He slipped a ring off his right hand. And then someone threw up. The mostly liquid vomit splattered the arena floor. A sour smell wafted through the area. What did you do? Emina glared at Aints as she ran over to Arch. Aints responded as though he was confused, but still definitely displeased. What is this lady doing? She looked someone in the face and threw up. How rude can you be? Everybody run. Arch screamed with tears in the corners of her eyes. Yes, a monster. As Arch threw up again, unable to hold herself together, the rest of the team realized why she was vomiting. It wasn't as if Aints had done something. Arch was just so scared and tense she couldn't withstand his vast magical power. In other words, we can win. His power is on another level. The word monster doesn't even begin to describe him. Arch sobbed. No way, no way, no way. Arch shook her head back and forth like a crazy person, and Emina hugged her tightly. Calm down, Robadick. I am on it, lioness heart. Arch, recovered from her fear thanks to Robadick's spell, stood with legs as unsteady as a newborn fawn as she held up her staff. You should all run for it. Humans can win against that thing. He is an unbeatable monster. We got it, Arch. We understand that very well, Arch. The moment he took off the ring, there was a flood of this intense feeling. It felt like the world was enveloped in it. I have goosebumps. Yeah, saying he is quite the monster doesn't even begin to cover it. All three of them had surpassed the limits of their caution. Their nerves were even more on edge. They fixed their eyes on Aints. Their expression said they understood that shifting their gaze for even a moment could result in death. We definitely can escape. The second we turn our backs to him, we die. Even looking away feels too risky. We need to find a way to buy time. You're not charging. Aints languidly scratched his skull with a bony finger. Hecarim didn't respond to the provocation. This enemy had combat ability that far surpassed anything he'd ever encountered. There was only one thing to aim for the moment he started casting, that is, the time a caster was most vulnerable. If he casts silent magic, it's all over. Hecarim began to muster his body's strength, as if he were a spring or a bow being drawn. Then I'll start. Touch of Undeath. What kind of spell is that? Arch, I don't know, I've never heard of it. With a watchful eye on the black haze enveloping Aints' right hand, and the unknown magic, Hecarim tensed his feet so he could dodge at a moment's notice. His teammates behind him seemed to be spreading out, wary of an area of effect attack. Suddenly, Aints began walking toward him. Hecarim blinked in surprise. His bearing was too nonchalant, full of holes. It wasn't the way a man who had just displayed the skills of a warrior should walk. Hecarim knew it was a trap for sure, but he couldn't fathom its purpose. Is he planning to do something with his magic? Does that spell only have an effect up close, or is it defense? He'd studied the most famous spells, so he was familiar with those. But since he wasn't a caster, Hecarim couldn't figure out what Aints was up to. Stay away from him. Emina's shout reverberated. A series of arrows went flying at Aints. She shot the 3 arrows using a skill, but Aints dexterously batted them away with a bony hand. You in my way. His voice was quiet and cold. The red flames in Aints' vacant orbits wavered. Watching his every move, Hecarim was the only one who understood. Just as a chill went up his spine, Aints vanished. Hecarim obeyed his instinct to turn on his heel and run. He could see the surprised faces of his teammates, but he had neither the time nor the energy to explain, not when Aints was standing behind Emina, slowly reaching out with his right hand. Emina, she hasn't noticed. He should scream no. The fact that he is not in a hurry might save us. Hecarim ran, using a martial art to boost his speed, but suddenly hesitated. Is protecting Emina the smartest thing to do, compared to Arch and Robodick, who could use support magic? Emina wasn't all that critical in this battle. He had no doubt it was better to drop someone who was a burden in order to ensure survival for the majority, but even so shit. He was making the wrong move as team leader. Though he understood he was essentially betraying his teammates, he didn't slow down. He was spurred on by emotion, not logic emotion that told him save Emina. Suddenly, an image of her in bed flitted across his mind. He smiled bitterly at himself for thinking of her smooth body in this life and death situation. Still, the energy pumping in his legs increased. It was the power of a man protecting his woman. Move. If Aints hadn't hesitated upon seeing him charging over, he might not have made it in time. But before Aints could touch Emina, he bowled her over. A small yelp sounded as she bit back the pain. It was obvious Aints was trying to decide whether to prioritize the man who had appeared in front of him or the escaped woman. Over here, you idiot, Hecarim shouted, and then focused on his martial arts. The first one he activated was Limit Break. He had to pay for it, but it briefly increased the number of martial arts he could use at once. Next, something inside him hurt. He used Dull Pain, then Physical Boost and Sturdy Arm. Strong Blow followed, then Twin Sword Slash. Thus his most powerful attack was born. The dual blades traced their arcs. The more acclimated to the speed of Hecarim's swings Aints had become during their earlier exchanges, the more his timing would be off now. It would be more difficult for him to evade. Hecarim had arranged things ahead of time. Getting too comfortable meant the end. This would be a lethal strike. Aints wouldn't be able to react. Yes, mine. The moment his swords should have been slicing into Aints' unguarded skull, the impact he felt was not that of blade against bone. Perfect resistance to cutting damage. As a worker, he'd experienced this sensation on adventures before, so he is completely resistant to stabbing and cutting. Is it even possible for a monster like that to exist? As Hecarim rushed to withdraw, a cold sensation plastered over his forehead. It was Aints' hand. Its vise-like grip wouldn't let Hecarim escape. Hecarim, Emina, he is completely resistant to cutting damage. He endured the awful pain and relayed the information he'd gained to his teammate behind him. That was when, still in Aints' clutches, he felt himself get lifted off the ground. He lashed out with the flat of his sword, but the undead grip showed no signs of loosening. No stabbing, cutting, or crushing it doesn't matter. Attacks from weaklings like you can even scratch me. How does that work? What a cheater. That is so low. He is lying, Emina. If that were true, he wouldn't have to fight so hard. He must have some weakness. You can fool us. I am sad that you don't believe me. I thought you understood well enough from that conversation earlier. Our close quarters battle up until now was basically an experiment. You must have taken hope from the fact that you put up an okay fight. I'll be merciful and hope that you were able to have nice dreams even in the hell that awaits you. You call that mercy? You shitty lowlife bastard. Let Hecarim go. Hecarim heard arrows being fired rapidly. Aints seemed unfazed. The pain in his forehead remained. Are you sure you want to do that? You might hit him. The horrible pain in Hecarim's head made him scared it might crack open. He struggled, but his opponent didn't budge. He kicked him with his steel-toed boots, but only stubbed his toes. Does it hurt? Don't worry. I won't kill you now. This is the most pity I can take on Thieves' paralysis. His body froze. No, he wasn't frozen, but paralyzed. Maybe Touch of Undeath was a waste if I was only going to paralyze him. Hecarim's ears picked up sounds, but to no avail. He heard a series of bow twangs. The response was a ridiculing voice. How many times do I have to tell you no? It's fine, you can resist. You'll feel more helpless that way. Run. His mouth wouldn't move, but it trembled. Even if they ran as fast as they could, this wasn't a run-of-the-mill enemy they could escape. But fighting was even more foolish. Especially without their warrior to keep the enemy's attacks at bay, their line would surely crumble. So who's next? You could have all come at me at once, but I suppose that's not much fun. Emina gazed at Hecarim, who was lying on the floor. He wasn't dead, but he might as well have been. She couldn't think of a way to save him from this incomprehensible monster. Aints gown. Still, you stupid, common sense said to abandon me. You colossal idiot, irritation welled up inside her. Stupid, 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 you big blockhead, moron. Those aren't very nice things to say to the man who tried to protect you. His words showed he understood nothing about Amina's feelings. But how could a monster understand human emotion? I know that. He is such a great leader that he is practically wasted on us. She took a breath. But you are still stupid to get carried away by your feelings. What are you talking about? She ignored the questioning voice and thought,